It was a Wednesday evening, late summer. The air smelled like cut grass and gasoline from the mower I'd just shut off. I was standing on my porch, sipping sweet tea, when I saw them walking up my driveway, 3 men in matching navy polos, with the letters HOA Security Division printed across their chests. Clipboards in hand, sunglasses on, like they were walking onto a crime scene. The one in front. A tall guy with a neatly trimmed beard and too much confidence called out, "Mr. Porter, we need to have a word about your property violations." I smiled just a little. "Violations?" I said. "That's a new one. What's the charge?" He didn't catch the sarcasm. "You've been warned about your fence color and your truck being parked in the driveway overnight. We've documented multiple infractions. You'll need to sign this acknowledgement form." I glanced at the paper. They'd printed violation notice. Satos 46, my truck, my old F-150, was parked exactly where it always was, in front of my own damn house. I leaned on the porch railing and said, "You boys got a warrant for that clipboard?" The bearded one frowned. "Sir, you don't seem to understand the seriousness of HOA enforcement." I cut him off. "No, I think you don't understand who you're talking to." He puffed up, looking around at his 2 backup singers like he had the upper hand. "This isn't personal, sir. It's policy." Behind me, through the screen door, I heard the faint crackle of the police radio in my kitchen, the one I kept on standby even off duty. I took a slow sip of tea, set it down, and stepped off the porch. "Let me show you something," I said. Their eyes followed me as I opened my truck door and pulled out the black nylon jacket hanging from the back seat. On the front, in white letters, County Sheriff. The bearded one froze mid-step. His clipboard tilted. "You're a law enforcement officer," he stammered. I smiled again, this time full. "Sheriff, actually. And you just trespassed on a county officer's property, tried to enforce private laws you don't have legal jurisdiction for, and implied authority you don't possess." Silence. Even the crickets seemed to stop chirping. "Now," I said, sliding the badge from my belt and letting it catch the porch light, "why don't you tell me again about these violations?" They glanced at each other, the bravado draining fast. The tall one cleared his throat. We'll just file this for now and come back later." I nodded. "No need. I'll be following up with your HOA board. You can let them know Sheriff Porter will be at the next meeting." They left without another word, heads low. I watched them go, the sun dipping behind the pines, painting my yard gold. I didn't know it yet, but that little visit was about to start something big. Something that would test everything I believed about authority, respect, and what it means to stand your ground. The next week, I walked into the HOA clubhouse dressed in jeans, boots, and my sheriff's jacket zipped halfway up. I wasn't there as Sheriff Porter, not officially. I was there as Jim Porter, homeowner. But the second I stepped through that door, every eye in the room turned toward me like I'd just walked into a standoff. The HOA board sat behind a long folding table. 5 people, 4 looking nervous, 1 looking smug. The smug one was Greg Mason, the HOA president. Mid-40s, perfect hair, and the kind of smile that always felt rehearsed. "Sheriff Porter," he said, drawing out the title like a joke. "Glad you could join us. I hope there aren't any misunderstandings between our enforcement team and yourself." I took a seat. "No misunderstanding. Greg, they came onto my property pretending to have legal authority. That's not an HOA issue. That's impersonation." He chuckled. "They're volunteers, Jim. Just doing their jobs. Maybe you overreacted." The word overreacted hit harder than I expected. I'd been on the force for 20 years, seen things that'd make most people freeze. Overreacting wasn't in my vocabulary. "I don't overreact," I said evenly. "I uphold the law." "There's a difference." The room got quiet. I could feel the tension crackling between us, like the static before a storm. Greg leaned forward, voice dripping with politeness. "Look, the HOA has rules. Everyone signs the same contract when they move in. No exceptions. You can't just park your truck wherever you want." "My driveway," I reminded him. "Not the street. Not blocking anyone. Just my truck on my land." He folded his hands. "Still against the guidelines." I looked around at the other members, one woman in her 50s who wouldn't meet my eyes, another man who seemed uncomfortable, and a young guy flipping through papers to avoid the silence. "You know what's funny?" I said quietly. I've arrested people for less arrogance than what's sitting at this table. Greg's smile faltered for the first time. Is that a threat? No, I said. It's a fact. Someone in the back, a neighbor, I think her name was Sandra, spoke up. Greg, this has gone too far. Jim's right. We're not the law. You can't just send people to his house. He turned on her. This is about standards. If we don't enforce the rules, the neighborhood falls apart. I stood. If you want standards, start with respect, not intimidation. Then I dropped a copy of the HOA charter on the table. See this? It says your officers are for safety patrol, not enforcement. That means they can call the police, people like me, if there's a real issue. Otherwise, they stay off private property. Greg's jaw tightened. You think you can scare me with a badge? No, I said, turning toward the door. I'm not trying to scare you. Greg, I'm trying to remind you that authority means nothing without integrity. And as I walked out, I heard the whispers start, neighbors murmuring, finally realizing maybe the HOA wasn't the only power in town. But what I didn't know was that Greg wasn't done. That night, something happened that changed everything. The next morning started like any other, coffee brewing, sun creeping over the trees, radio murmuring low. But before I could take my first sip, there was another knock at my door. 2 county deputies stood outside. My deputies. Sheriff, one of them said carefully, we got a call. HOA's filed a formal complaint. Says you threatened their board last night. I stared for a moment, then sighed. Of course they did. They didn't want to be there. I could tell. We had to follow protocol, sir. Mind if we just document that you're cooperative? Go ahead, I said. I've got nothing to hide. While they filled out their notes, I looked across the street. Greg Mason stood in his yard, arms folded, smirking. He wanted a reaction. He wanted me to snap. But he didn't understand something fundamental about me. I didn't fight people with anger. I fought with truth. By that evening, I'd gathered every record, every letter, every photo I needed. When the HOA scheduled an emergency meeting, I showed up early. This time, not in uniform, but in plain clothes and carrying a folder full of facts. The room was packed. Dozens of neighbors had heard about the so-called incident. Greg looked nervous. Now, tapping his pen like a man waiting for backup that wasn't coming, I stood and addressed the crowd. I want to make something clear, I said. This isn't about a fence color or a parked truck. This is about power and what happens when it gets misused. A few people nodded. I could see it in their faces. They'd been there too. The warning letters, the threats, the intimidation. I held up a photo of the 3 officers who came to my door. These men trespassed on private property. That's illegal. They carried badges they made themselves. That's impersonation. But instead of pressing charges, I'm giving this community a chance to fix what's broken. Greg shifted in his seat. You can't just come in here and... I cut him off. Actually, Greg, I can. You see, I did some digging. Turns out the HOA's charter expired last year. The renewal paperwork was never filed. Technically, this board hasn't had legal authority for months. The room erupted in whispers. Greg's face went pale. I stepped closer, voice steady. You've been enforcing rules that don't even exist, threatening people under false authority. And if you think that's going to continue, you're mistaken. Sandra, the neighbor who'd spoken up before, stood and clapped. Others followed. The applause spread, not loud or mocking, but proud. Greg slumped back, defeated. I looked around the room. Folks, I'm not saying rules are bad. I'm saying fairness matters more. We live in a country built on freedom, and that starts in our own front yards. As I walked out into the cool night air, a young couple stopped me on the steps. Sheriff Porter, the man said, you made us realize something. You can't just follow rules, you have to understand them. ESM, that's the lesson, son. Don't let authority scare you into silence. Stand up when something feels wrong. Respect's earned, not demanded. They nodded, and for the first time in weeks, I felt peace settle in. The HOA officers never came back. And Greg? He resigned quietly the next week. If someone tries to use power to control you, ask questions. Know your rights. Don't confuse fear with respect. Because sometimes the strongest stand you'll ever take is simply saying, no, not this time, V.